Marriage in Skyrim is supposed to represent a fresh start, a chance to settle down after countless battles, build a home, and spend your adventures with someone you can trust. And for many spouses, that's exactly what it becomes. But not everyone wearing an amulet of Mara deserves that happy ending. Some potential husbands and wives carry deeply unsettling pasts. Others have personalities that make you question why anyone would want to marry them in the first place. Whether it's murder, betrayal, cruelty, disturbing beliefs, or simply being some of the most disliked NPCs in the game, these characters bring far more baggage into a marriage than most players ever stop to consider. What's interesting is that Skyrim rarely warns you about any of this. It simply gives you the option to marry them and leaves the decision entirely in your hands. So today we're looking beyond their usefulness as followers or shopkeepers and focusing on the people themselves, because these aren't just questionable spouses, they're the most disturbing and hated husbands and wives in all of Skyrim. Not every disliked spouse in Skyrim earns the reputation because they're evil. Some aren't murderers, cultists, or Daedric worshippers. They don't threaten innocent people or hide disturbing secrets beneath an otherwise friendly appearance. Instead, they're disliked for a much simpler reason. They leave almost no impression whatsoever. Among Skyrim's many marriage candidates, Pavo Atius has quietly developed a reputation as one of the least exciting spouses in the entire game. Living at the left-hand mine in the Reach, Pavo is, on paper, an honest and hard-working miner who simply wants to make a living extracting ore from the mountains surrounding Markarth. Compared to many of Skyrim's more morally questionable marriage options, he almost seems refreshingly normal. But that normality quickly becomes his biggest weakness. Players often remember him not for anything he does, but for everything he doesn't. He has very little personality and almost no memorable dialogue, no combat utility as a follower, and plays only a tiny role within the world. As a result, he has become one of the most overlooked and frequently criticized spouses in Skyrim. Not because he's dangerous, but because he feels almost completely forgettable. The first thing most players notice about him is just how ordinary he is. That might sound unfair. After all, not every NPC needs an elaborate backstory or a dramatic questline. But Skyrim is filled with memorable personalities: war heroes, mercenaries, assassins, mages, hunters, jarls, thieves, and priests. Compared to them, Pavo almost disappears into the background. If you removed him from left-hand mine entirely, many players wouldn't even notice. That's an unusual position for a marriage candidate. Marriage in Skyrim naturally encourages players to spend a great deal of time with a character. The more time you spend with someone, the more important their personality becomes. Unfortunately for Pavo, he has very little personality for players to connect with. His dialogue rarely extends beyond his work. Mining dominates his life. He talks about ore, about the mine, about keeping operations running. Those conversations certainly make sense for someone in his profession, but they don't leave much lasting impact. Other marriage candidates reveal hopes, regrets, dreams, humour, conflicts. Pavo rarely moves beyond his occupation. The result is a character who feels more like an employee than an individual. That lack of depth becomes even more noticeable after completing the quest involving the left-hand mine and Kol Sega. Pavo asks the Dragonborn to clear nearby Forsworn who have occupied the mine, preventing him and his friend from continuing their work. On paper, this sounds like an opportunity for character development. Perhaps we'll learn more about his determination, his courage, his relationship with his business partner. Instead, the quest reinforces how dependent he is upon the player. Pavo doesn't accompany you. He doesn't attempt to reclaim the mine himself. He waits. Once the danger has been removed by everyone else, he happily resumes mining. Mechanically, this makes perfect sense. Narratively, however, it leaves him feeling surprisingly passive. Many players interpret this as cowardice. Whether that's entirely fair is open to debate. Pavo is, after all, a miner rather than a warrior. Yet Skyrim constantly presents ordinary people rising to extraordinary challenges. Compared to those examples, Pavo's unwillingness to confront the problem himself becomes increasingly noticeable. The comparison with his business partner is particularly revealing. Both men work the same mine, both face the same threat. Yet Gat often leaves a stronger impression, despite receiving similarly limited screen time. His orc heritage immediately gives him a more distinctive identity. His dialogue feels slightly more memorable. Pavo, by contrast, remains almost painfully ordinary. Nothing truly separates him from dozens of other unnamed workers scattered throughout Skyrim. For a marriage candidate, that's a significant disadvantage. Marriage also raises practical considerations. And this is another area where Pavo struggles to stand out. Unlike many spouses who double as capable followers, Pavo offers virtually no combat value. He cannot accompany the Dragonborn into dangerous dungeons. He cannot provide meaningful assistance during difficult battles. He simply remains at home performing the standard spouse routine. That limitation wouldn't matter if his personality compensated for it. Unfortunately, it rarely does. Players seeking either an engaging companion or a useful follower often find themselves disappointed. Compared to spouses like Ayla, Janassa, or Majol, the difference is dramatic. Those characters actively contribute to adventures. Pavo waits for them to end. Even his profession works against him in subtle ways. Mining is one of Skyrim's most repetitive occupations. Every day follows much the same pattern. Travel to the mine, swing the pickaxe, return home, repeat. That routine naturally shapes Pavo's identity. His conversations rarely escape that cycle because his life rarely escapes that mining cycle as well. While realism certainly has value, it doesn't necessarily create memorable storytelling. The repetition becomes part of his character, predictable, steady, reliable perhaps, but never particularly exciting. Compared to many of Skyrim's more adventurous marriage candidates, Pavo almost feels disconnected from the game's sense of exploration. Another reason players often overlook him is location. Left-Hand Mine sits in the Reach, an area already filled with memorable landmarks. Markarth dominates the region, Dwemer ruins attract attention, Forsworn camps create constant danger. Against that backdrop, a quiet miner becomes easy to ignore. Many players simply never spend enough time around the Left-Hand Mine to develop any attachment. Some never even discover Pavo at all. That geographical isolation contributes significantly to his obscurity. Unlike characters living in Whiterun or Solitude, he exists far from Skyrim's busiest population centres. Visibility matters, Pavo rarely receives it. Compared to other husbands, the differences become increasingly obvious. Characters like Ballymunde possess strong personal stories built around their craftsmanship. Scouts Many Marshes carries meaningful commentary about Argonian discrimination. Vilkas and Farkas connect directly to one of Skyrim's largest questlines. However, Vilkas often always portrays some of Pavo's likeliness as well. Even Sondus Drennan, another miner, leaves a strong impression thanks to his friendship with Darkwater Crossing's residents and his slightly more distinctive personality. Pavo simply struggles to compete, not because he's badly written, but because he isn't given enough material to become memorable. There is, however, another perspective worth considering. Pavo's ordinary nature may actually be intentional. Skyrim's world benefits from containing people who aren't heroes. Not everyone should possess extraordinary abilities. Not everyone should carry tragic backstories. Someone has to mine the ore. Someone has to represent ordinary life. Pavo fulfills that role remarkably well. In another context, those qualities might even become strengths. He represents stability, honest work, a simple existence far removed from dragons and Daedric princes. For players seeking an uncomplicated life, Pavo could arguably become an appealing spouse. The problem is that Skyrim rarely encourages players to value simplicity. The game constantly rewards excitement, adventure, conflict, and discovery. Against those expectations, Pavo inevitably feels underwhelming. His honesty also deserves recognition. Unlike several marriage candidates who conceal troubling histories, Pavo presents himself exactly as he is. There are no hidden murders, no cults, no Daedric bargains, no criminal enterprises. He earns his living through legitimate work. Morally, he stands above many spouses discussed throughout Skyrim. Ironically, that very decency contributes to his reputation for being dull. Players often remember dramatic characters more easily than kind ones. Conflict creates memorability, contentment rarely does. Still, when discovering the most hated husbands and wives in Skyrim, hatred may not even be the correct word for Pavo. Indifference fits better. Players rarely despise him, they simply just forget him. And being forgotten may be an even harsher fate, especially for a marriage candidate designed to become part of the player's home. Ultimately, Pavo Atios represents a fascinating kind of disappointment within Skyrim's marriage system. Not because he betrays the Dragonborn, not because he possesses disturbing beliefs, not because he threatens everyone, but because he never quite becomes more than what players first see. A miner, a quiet man living beside a small operation in the Reach. A spouse who offers safety but very little excitement. In a world overflowing with larger-than-life personalities, ancient prophecies, legendary warriors, and unforgettable companions, Pavo struggles to carve out an identity of his own. And perhaps that's why so many players quietly move past him when choosing a husband. Not out of dislike, but because Skyrim offers so many characters who leave a stronger impression. Pavo simply remains where he has always been, standing beside the mine, working honestly, living quietly, and fading into the background of a province that rarely remembers those who never demand attention. First impressions matter, and very few marriage candidates in Skyrim make a first impression quite like Vilkas. Before many players even consider marrying him, they meet him as one of the senior members of the Companions, a proud Nord warrior who immediately questions whether the Dragonborn is worthy of joining their ranks. Rather than offering encouragement, Vilkas dismisses your abilities, criticizes your skill, and treats you as though you're little more than another inexperienced recruit wasting his time. It's an introduction designed to establish his status within the Companions, but for many players it leaves a lasting impression that never fully disappears. Even after completing the entire Companions questline, curing his lycanthropy if you choose, and eventually marrying him, some players still remember that original arrogance. Combined with his surprisingly submissive personality after marriage, numerous follower bugs, and occasional AI problems, Vilkas has become one of Skyrim's most polarizing husbands. Some players consider him one of the best spouses in the game, while others find him frustrating, inconsistent, and difficult to like. Few marriage candidates divide opinion quite as much. The first source of that division comes from his personality during the opening stages of the Companions questline. When the Dragonborn first arrives at Yovaskar, Vilkas immediately establishes himself as someone who expects excellence. Unfortunately, that expectation often comes across as arrogance. He questions your ability, he mocks your experience, he acts as though you've done nothing to deserve standing among the Companions. From his perspective, this attitude makes sense. The Companions are one of Skyrim's oldest warrior orders. They value strength above almost everything else. Respect must be earned. Yet from the player's perspective, especially after escaping Helgen and surviving dragons, Vilkas' attitude can feel unnecessarily dismissive. Many players never entirely forgive him for it. Compared to other Companions, the contrast is striking. Farkas welcomes the Dragonborn far more warmly. Ayala immediately demonstrates confidence without constantly belittling newcomers. Kodlak inspires respect through wisdom rather than intimidation. Vilkas instead chooses criticism. That approach establishes an interesting character arc, but it also risks alienating players before they ever begin to understand him. Ironically, once players progress through the questline, Vilkas undergoes one of the most dramatic personality shifts among Skyrim's marriage candidates. The proud warrior who once questioned your abilities gradually transforms into someone almost completely devoted to the Dragonborn. And for some players, the change feels almost too dramatic. After marriage, Vilkas adopts the same standard spouse dialogue shared by many NPCs. Suddenly, the once stubborn companion begins greeting you with unconditional affection. He speaks warmly, supports nearly every decision, rarely displays the confidence or stubbornness that originally defined him. For some players, this transition feels satisfying. It represents character growth, mutual respect, earned through shared battles. For others, however, it feels strangely artificial, almost as though two completely different characters have been stitched together. The proud warrior disappears, and a remarkably passive husband replaces him. That inconsistency often becomes one of the biggest criticisms directed towards Vilkas. The Dragonborn earns his respect, but perhaps earns too much. His confidence almost evaporates. Marriage exposes another issue unique to Skyrim's broader design philosophy. Many marriage candidates lose a significant portion of their individuality after the wedding ceremony. Vilkas suffers particularly badly from this because his original personality was so distinctive. Before marriage, he possesses ambition, authority, professional pride. After marriage, much of that disappears beneath generic spouse dialogue. Players expecting the same determined companion often feel disappointed. It creates the impression that marriage simplifies rather than develops his character. Mechanically, Vilkas should be one of the strongest husbands available. He's an experienced warrior, an accomplished companion, a master trainer in two-handed combat. Everything about his background suggests he should excel as a follower. Unfortunately, this is where technical problems begin to overshadow his strengths. Vilkas has developed a reputation for numerous bugs that affect both follower behavior and marriage. Some players report him refusing to become available as a follower after certain quests. Others encounter issues where he permanently loses follower functionality altogether. Marriage itself occasionally creates pathfinding problems or dialogue inconsistency depending upon quest progression. These bugs are not universal. Many players experience no issue whatsoever, but they occur frequently enough to become closely associated with the character. That's unfortunate because they distract from what should otherwise be one of Skyrim's strongest companions. His combat abilities deserve recognition despite those problems. When functioning correctly, Vilkas performs extremely well in battle. His heavy armor, two-handed weapon specialization, strong health pool all make him a capable frontline fighter. Unlike spouses chosen primarily for personality, Vilkas actively contributes during exploration. He belongs beside warriors. Combat feels natural for him. That practical usefulness partially explains why opinions remain so divided. Some players encounter the best version of Vilkas. Others encounter one plagued by bugs. The difference dramatically shapes overall impression. His relationship with Farkas also adds subtle depth to his character. Unlike many NPCs existing entirely in isolation, Vilkas possesses meaningful family connections. The brothers clearly care for one another. They protect one another, support one another. Those moments humanize Vilkas considerably. Beneath his stern exterior lies genuine loyalty. Players paying close attention often come to appreciate these quieter interactions. They reveal someone more complicated than simple arrogance. The companion's questline itself gradually reinforces this complexity. As the story progresses, Vilkas becomes increasingly vulnerable. The revelation surrounding the Circle's lycanthropy affects him deeply. His respect for Codlac Whitemane becomes increasingly apparent. His desire to honour the Harbinger's final wishes ultimately reveals a more thoughtful individual than first impressions suggest. This character development is one of Skyrim's better examples of gradual writing. The problem is that many players remember beginnings more clearly than endings. Arrogance lingers, growth is easy to overlook, and compared to Farkas, the contrast becomes fascinating. Farkas often wins immediate affection because he presents himself honestly from the beginning. He is kind, straightforward, protective. Vilkas asks players to earn his respect first. Neither response is unreasonable. It largely depends on whether players enjoy characters who begin as rivals before becoming allies. His reputation within the community also reflects these divided experiences. Discussions surrounding Skyrim spouses frequently place Vilkas near the top of both positive and negative rankings simultaneously. Some players consider him one of the most rewarding husbands because of his substantial character arc. Others criticize him because they never find that transformation convincing. Few spouses inspire such dramatically different opinions. Even aesthetically, Vilkas benefits from his identity as a classic Nord warrior. His appearance matches player expectations perfectly: scarred, strong, confident. He visually represents everything the companions stand for. For players role-playing traditional Nord characters, that identity becomes particularly appealing. Marriage feels thematically appropriate, yet appearance alone cannot overcome personality concerns or technical issues. Another subtle criticism, sometimes directed towards Vilkas, involves emotional distance. Even after completing his questline, some players feel they never truly know him. He speaks relatively little compared to major companions from later Bethesda games. His motivations remain somewhat understated. Important emotional moments often occur indirectly rather than through extended conversations. Players fill many gaps themselves, some enjoy that restraint. Others wish Bethesda had developed him further. Compared to deeply written companions in more modern RPGs, Vilkas occasionally feels incomplete. That isn't entirely his fault. It reflects Skyrim's overall companion design. Still, it contributes to his polarizing reputation. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of Vilkas is that both major criticisms directed towards him contradict one another. Some dislike him because he's arrogant, others dislike him because he's too submissive. Those two complaints point toward the same underlying issue: consistency. Players wanted the confident warrior they gradually came to respect, not necessarily the dismissive recruit instructor, nor the almost generic spouse. Something between the two. A husband retaining his confidence while genuinely respecting the Dragonborn. The game never quite achieves that balance. Ultimately, Vilkas remains one of Skyrim's most complicated marriage candidates. His strengths are considerable: excellent combat ability, meaningful questline, strong connections to one of Skyrim's most iconic factions, and visible personal growth. Yet those strengths constantly compete against memorable flaws. An abrasive introduction, generic post-marriage dialogue, persistent technical bugs, occasional inconsistency between who he is before marriage and who he becomes afterward. None of these problems make him a bad character. In fact, they arguably make him a more interesting one. Because unlike many spouses who inspire near universal agreement, Vilkas continues dividing opinion more than a decade after Skyrim's release. Some players see one of the game's finest husbands, others see wasted potential hidden beneath bugs and uneven writing. And perhaps that's exactly why he remains so memorable. Not because everyone loves him, not because everyone hates him, but because almost everyone who spends enough time with Vilkas eventually forms a strong opinion one way or the other. A rarity among Skyrim's many marriage candidates, and proof that even an imperfect character can leave a lasting impression. Marriage in Skyrim is supposed to be a simple joy. In a world where dragons return, wars rage, and snow buries the roads, having someone to share your burdens with is meant to be a comfort. Bethesda designed Skyrim's marriage system as a reward for adventurers. Marry a spouse, move them into your home, enjoy home-cooked meals, and earn a little extra gold from their shop earnings. But not all marriages are equal. Some husbands are loyal and sweet, tending to the home and treating the Dragonborn with respect. Others, however, are less than ideal. Skyrim players quickly discovered that a handful of male spouses are either lazy, unpleasant, or outright despised. Characters who, once married, remind you daily that love in Skyrim can be more of a burden than a blessing. Rogvir is a unique husband option in Skyrim because, unlike most potential spouses, he begins the game directly doomed. If you attend the opening scene in Solitude, you'll see him executed for treason after allowing Ulfric Stormcloak to escape the city. But with console commands or mods, Rogvir becomes a marriage candidate, and this is where players' hatred shines through. Marrying Rogvir means tying yourself to a man defined by betrayal. To Imperial loyalists, he is a traitor who aided Ulfric in murdering the High King. To Stormcloak sympathizers, he is a liability, someone who got himself killed almost instantly for a rash act. In both cases, he embodies failure. Even beyond politics, Rogvir has little to offer. He doesn't own property, doesn't bring wealth, and his entire identity revolves around a single disastrous decision. While other husbands may frustrate players with laziness, Rogvir frustrates them with sheer futility. Why marry a man remembered only as a traitor whose blood stains Solitude's stones? For most, the answer is simply you don't. Mikkel, the bard of Whiterun's Bennett Mare, is infamous even without marriage. When you first meet him, he's busy harassing Carlotta, a single mother who clearly wants nothing to do with him. The Dragonborn can intervene, threatening him into backing off, a small moment that reveals his sleazy arrogance. Yet Mikkel is technically marriageable through mods, and players who test this path quickly regret it. His dialogue reeks of smugness, his songs are repetitive, and his ego fills every room he enters. Unlike bards such as Fen in Riverwood, who can at least be charming in a bumbling way, Mikkel is universally disliked by Whiterun's townfolk. As a husband, Mikkel embodies every stereotype of the lazy, self-absorbed partner. He does not work beyond his music, he contributes little to the household, and he acts as though your adventures exist to give him inspiration for another awful song. Skyrim fans regularly cite him as one of the most punchable faces in the game, and marriage only cements that distaste. Not all husbands are loud or arrogant. Some are despised for the opposite reason, their passiveness. Sondus Drenham, a Dunmer mine vendor living in Darkwater Crossing, is a perfect example. On paper, he seems like a decent man. He's hardworking, polite, and willing to marry if befriended. But once he joins your household, players quickly realise that he offers almost nothing of value. He doesn't own property, doesn't bring unique dialogue, and his background is so shallow that he feels like filler content more than a fleshed out partner. More importantly, he is frustrating because he embodies a wasted opportunity. Darkwater Crossing is one of Skyrim's more interesting small settlements, filled with stories of displaced Dunmer trying to survive in harsh Nord territory. Yet Sondus adds nothing to this atmosphere once he's married. He doesn't tell stories of his life, doesn't comment on Skyrim's tensions, and fades into obscurity as a bland extra mouth at your dinner table. For players, he becomes less a partner and more a reminder of Skyrim's underdeveloped marriage system. A man who exists simply to stand in your home and occasionally hand you food. Torvar, one of the newest recruits to the companions in Whiterun, is a diversive figure, even before marriage. Among fellow warriors, he is seen as lazy, arrogant, and overly fond of the mead casks in the Great Hall. He lacks the honour of Vilkas, the charm of Farkas, or the charisma of Ayla. Instead, Torvar is a man who talks a big game, but spends most of his time drinking. If married, these qualities only worsen. Torvar embodies the archetype of the drunk husband, stumbling, unreliable, and frustrating to have around. Skyrim players often comment on how he feels like the last heroic companion. As a husband, Torvar offers little emotional depth. He doesn't provide unique commentary or meaningful support. Instead, he drags down the household with his lack of ambition. In a game about epic quests and dragon slaying, who wants to come home to a spouse who reeks of spilled mead and wasted potential? Rogi Notbeard, a miner from Kynesgrove, is one of Skyrim's more obscure marriage candidates. At first glance, he seems like a kind, down-to-earth man, but upon closer inspection, players often find him as one of the least appealing husbands available. Rogi's backstory is one of disappointment. Once a warrior, he now spends his days mining and reminiscing about past glories. His questline revolves around recovering a family shield, a small errand that feels anticlimactic compared to the grand adventures Skyrim usually offer. Once married, Rogi mostly fades into the background, contributing nothing of significance. What makes him particularly disliked is the gap between who he could be and who he is. With a name like Notbeard and a warrior's past, he should be memorable. Instead, he's timid, unremarkable, and strangely pathetic. Skyrim fans often list him as one of the least satisfying spouses because he feels like marrying a broken dream. The hatred for Skyrim's worst husbands isn't just about individual characters. It reveals a deeper flaw in the game's design. Skyrim's marriage system is largely mechanical, where an amulet of Mara complete a small favour quest and you can marry almost anyone regardless of personality. This system creates a strange problem. Husbands and wives often feel interchangeable, aside from a few exceptions like Vilkas or Balimund. Most spouses repeat the same lines, provide the same shop earnings, and cook the same meals. The differences are cosmetic rather than meaningful. As a result, players grow frustrated when they realise that marrying Mikkel or Torvar feels no different than marrying a genuinely kind spouse like Onmund. The hated husbands stand out not because they are more useless than others, but because their personalities actively clash with the fantasy of a supportive partner. Skyrim asks players to invest in love, but the system delivers repetition and disappointment. So why do these particular husbands attract so much hatred from players? The answer lies in expectations. Marriage is supposed to be a reward, a comfort, a safe haven in the chaos of Skyrim. When the man waiting at home is arrogant, boring, or useless, that comfort evaporates. Players don't hate Rogi Notbeard or Saunders Drenham because they're evil. They hate them because they're disappointing. They hate Mikkel because he's irritating. They hate Torvar because he's lazy. They hate Rogvir because he's defined by failure. In every case, the marriage fantasy is broken. Instead of a partner worth adventuring for, you're left with a dead weight. Skyrim is a game filled with choices. You can be a hero or a villain, a mage or a warrior, a thief or a noble knight. But one of the strangest choices is who you marry. For some players, this is a sweet role-playing element, a way to ground the Dragonborn in a life beyond battle. But for others, it becomes a source of frustration when the spouse they choose turns out to be among Skyrim's most hated husbands. From Rogvir's disgrace to Mikkel's arrogance, from Saunders' blandness to Torvar's drunkenness. Skyrim reminds us that not every story ends with happily ever after. In fact, sometimes it ends with the player reloading a save and pretending the Amulet of Mara never left their inventory. In the end, the most hated husbands in Skyrim stand as cautionary tales. They show us that in a land of dragons, gods, and epic dynasties, even love can be as treacherous as a frost troll on the mountain path. Marriage in Skyrim is simple. You find someone, wear an amulet, say a few words, and suddenly you've built a life together. It's clean, straightforward, almost too perfect. But the more you look into it, the more cracks start to show. Because not every spouse in Skyrim is as normal as they seem. Some have pasts that don't quite add up. Others have habits, dialogue, or implications that feel off in ways the game never fully explains. They're not dangerous in an obvious way. That's what makes them unsettling. It's the small details, the quiet lines, the things you only notice after the fact. So today we're ranking the most disturbing wives in all of Skyrim. Not based on strength, not based on usefulness, but based on how uncomfortable they become the more you think about them. Some characters in Skyrim feel unsettling because of what they are, but Muri is disturbing because of what she becomes, and how easily she gets there. On the surface, she seems like one of the more grounded potential spouses in the game. You meet her in Markarth, working at the Hag's Cure, a quiet apothecary tucked away in a city already filled with tension and moral ambiguity. She doesn't stand out immediately. She's polite, soft-spoken, even somewhat sympathetic when you first speak to her. But the moment you dig just a little deeper, the initial impression starts to fall apart in a way that feels far more personal than most other characters in the game. Muri isn't just tied to darkness, she actively invites you into it. Her story revolves around betrayal. She was taken in by a man named Alain Dufont, someone she trusted, someone she believed cared about her. But that trust was exploited. He used her to gain access to a wealthy family, stole from them, and then disappeared, leaving Muri to take the blame. As a result, she was cast out, her reputation destroyed, her life effectively ruined. On paper, it's a tragic backstory, one that fits comfortably within Skyrim's world of hardship and misfortune. But it's what Muri does with that pain that makes her unsettling. Instead of moving on, instead of trying to rebuild, she fixates on revenge. And not in a distant or emotional way, but in a cold, calculated one. She joins the Dark Brotherhood, not out of desperation, not because she has no other options, but because she chooses it as the most effective way to get what she wants. And when you take on her contract, the way she speaks about it is what really stands out. There's no hesitation, no moral conflict, just clarity. She wants Elaine dead. That much is expected. But then she adds something else, something that shifts the entire tone of the situation. She asks you to kill Nilzine Shadowshield as well, an innocent woman who had nothing to do with the betrayal beyond being connected to the family that cast Muri out. And her reasoning, it's not strategic, it's not necessary, it's personal. She believes Nilzine deserved it, not because of anything she did directly, but because she was part of the life Muri lost. It's guilt by association, taken to an extreme that feels deeply uncomfortable. And the way Muri presents this request is what makes it worse. She doesn't beg, she doesn't struggle to justify it. She simply expects you to understand. That quiet expectation is what makes her so disturbing, because it reveals how far she's basically already gone. By the time you meet her, Muri has already crossed the line. The revenge isn't a breaking point, it's a continuation of something she's fully committed to. And if you choose to carry out both killings, she rewards you not just with gratitude, but with affection as well. Her approval isn't just tied to the completion of the contract, it's tied to how thoroughly you carry out her version of justice. And that's where things take an even darker turn. Because Muri is a potential spouse. After everything, after the manipulation, the revenge, the willingness to see an innocent person dead, you can marry her, settle down, build a life together. And the game presents this as completely normal. There's no added tension, no lingering consequence, no moment where her past catches up to her. She transitions seemingly from orchestrating murders to running a shop and offering you daily income. That contrast is what makes her so unsettling in the context of marriage, because nothing about her has actually changed. She hasn't reflected, she hasn't grown, she hasn't shown any sign that what she did or asked you to do was wrong. It's just over, or at least it's treated that way. But as a player, that knowledge doesn't go away. You know what she's capable of, you know she thinks. And the fact the game allows you to place her into such a calm domestic role without addressing any of that creates a kind of dissonance that's hard to ignore. It raises uncomfortable questions. If she was willing to go that far once, what's stopping her from doing it again? If someone else crosses her, even in a small way, how would she respond? And more importantly, how much of her kindness is genuine, and how much of it is simply directed at you because you helped her get what she wanted? Unlike other darker characters in Skyrim, Muri doesn't feel distant or exaggerated. She feels grounded, real in a way that makes her actions harder to dismiss. There's no Daedric influence guiding her, no madness distorting her perspective. Everything she does comes from a place that feels human. And that's what makes it worse, because her story isn't about corruption, it's about choice. She was wronged, yes, but the path she takes afterwards was entirely her own. And the fact that she walks in so confidently, without hesitation or regret, is what pushes her into genuinely disturbing territory. In a game where many spouses are defined by simplicity and routine, Muri stands out as someone whose past never quite settles, no matter how normal things appear on the surface. And because of that, she earns a solid 9 out of 10 on the disturbing scale. Some characters in Skyrim are unsettling because of hidden darkness, others because of past actions. But Janassa is disturbing because she doesn't hide anything at all. From the moment you meet her in the Drunken Huntsman in Whiterun, she presents herself with a kind of honesty that feels refreshing at first until you actually listen to what she's saying. She's a mercenary, a sellsword, someone who lives by the blade. That alone isn't unusual in Skyrim, it's actually quite common. But the way Janassa talks about violence, the way she frames it, not as a necessity, not as survival, but as something closer to expression, is what makes her stand out in a much more uncomfortable way. Janassa doesn't just accept killing, she enjoys it. And more than that, she seems to appreciate it. When she speaks about combat, there's a tone to it that feels almost artistic. She talks about battle like it's a craft, like every strike, every movement, every kill is part of something more refined than simple brutality. There's no anger behind it, no sense of chaos. It's controlled, deliberate, almost elegant in her mind. And that's where the unease begins. Because most violent characters in Skyrim are driven by something: rage, loyalty, desperation, ideology. Even assassins like those in the Dark Brotherhood frame their actions within ritual and belief. But she doesn't rely on any of that. She strips violence down to its core and then builds it back up as something admirable, something worth doing for its own sake. She makes it sound clean, which in a world like Skyrim feels deeply unnatural. When you travel with her, this perspective becomes even clearer. She doesn't question your decisions. She doesn't hesitate, no matter what you ask of her. Bandits, guards, innocents, it doesn't matter. There's no moral line she refuses to cross. No situation where she steps back and says, "This is too far." She follows, she fights, she kills, without judgment. And that complete willingness to do anything you ask of her is what makes her so unsettling as a companion, and even more so as a spouse. Because when you marry Janassa, nothing about that mindset changes at all. There's no shift in her personality, no softening of her views. She doesn't suddenly adopt a more peaceful outlook or reflect on her past. She simply brings that same philosophy in a domestic setting. One moment she's speaking about home, routine, and shared life. And the next, she's still the same person who views a blade through someone as something almost beautiful. That contrast is where the discomfort really sets in, because it creates a kind of duality that never fully resolves. On one hand, she can be calm, loyal, even supportive in a traditional sense. She fulfills the role the game assigns to a spouse without issue. But underneath that, there's this unwavering acceptance of violence that never fades. It's not something she turns off. It's just part of who she is. And the game never challenges it. There's no moment where worldview is questioned or pushed back against. No dialogue that forces her to reflect or reconsider. She exists in a kind of moral vacuum, where a perspective is presented as just another valid way of living in Skyrim's harsh world. But the more you think about it, the harder that becomes to accept. Because Janassa doesn't just live in a violent world. She elevates that violence into something more, something intentional, something refined. And that raises uncomfortable questions about what she values and how she sees the people around her. What if she tries to kill you? If combat is an art form to her, what does that make her enemies? Targets, subjects, materials? It blurs the line between survival and expression in a way that feels deeply off, even by Skyrim's standards. What makes it even stranger is how composed she is. There's no madness in her voice, no instability in her behaviour. She's calm, measured, and completely in control of herself. That level of clarity makes her harder to dismiss as just another violent character. She knows exactly what she's doing, and she's perfectly fine with it. That quiet certainty is what lingers, because it suggests that this isn't a phase or a reaction to a circumstance. It's a philosophy, one she's fully embraced. And that doesn't leave much room for anything else, does it? As a follower, that makes her incredibly effective, reliable, adaptable, unquestioning. But as a spouse, it creates a kind of underlying tension that never fully goes away. You're not just living with someone who can fight. You're living with someone who sees violence as something more than just a means to an end. And that perspective never fits comfortably into the peaceful life. In a game where many companions and spouses are defined by simplicity, Janassa stands out because of how consistent she is. She doesn't hide her nature. She doesn't soften it. She just is who she is, from beginning to end. And while that honesty might seem admirable at first, the more you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. Because there's nothing stopping her, no boundaries, no hesitation, no line she won't cross. Just a blade, and the belief that using it is something worth appreciating. And for that reason, Janassa earns a 7.5 out of 10 on the disturbing scale. A lot of characters in Skyrim don't feel disturbing at first. They feel powerful, respected, even admirable. And Ayla the Huntress fits that role perfectly. She's a central figure in the Companions, one of the most iconic factions in the game, and everything about her presentation suggests strength, confidence, and control. She's a skilled warrior, a devoted member of her circle, and someone who clearly understands her place in the world. But the more you look at what defines Ayla, not just what she does, but what she believes, the more that image starts to shift into something far more unsettling. Because Ayla doesn't just fight, she worships the act of hunting. And not in a casual or cultural sense, but in devotion to Herson, the Daedric Prince of the Hunt. Now, Daedric worship in Skyrim isn't exactly rare. There are countless characters tied to Daedric princes in one way or another. But what makes Ayla stand out is how normalized her devotion is. She doesn't hide it, she doesn't treat it as something dangerous or forbidden. To her, Herson isn't a distant, mysterious force. He's something to be respected, followed, even admired. And that belief is directly tied to what she is. Ayla is a werewolf. Not temporarily, not reluctantly, but by choice. While other members of the Companions eventually seek a cure, seeing lycanthropy as a curse or something they've outgrown, Ayla embraces it completely. She doesn't view it as a burden. She sees it as a gift, an extension of her identity, something that connects her more closely to the Daedric Prince and the ideals she values. Strength, instinct, the thrill of the hunt. On its own, that might not seem disturbing. After all, Skyrim is full of transformations, powers, and supernatural elements. But what makes Ayla different is how comfortable she is with it. There's no internal conflict, no hesitation, no sense that she's struggling with what she's become. She is basically just like Janassa. She's already decided, and she's at peace with it. That certainty is what starts to feel off, because when you look closer at what being a werewolf actually entails, losing control, feeding on others, giving in to instinct over reason, it's hard to reconcile that with the idea of a stable, grounded character. And yet Ayla never questions it. She doesn't draw a line between her human self and her transformed state. To her, it's all part of the same existence, which raises an uncomfortable idea. Where does the control end and the instinct begin? As a companion, Ayla is loyal and capable. She fights alongside you without hesitation, fully embracing the role of a warrior. But there's always that underlying layer to her character, that connection to something more primal, more unpredictable. And while the game never forces that unpredictability into direct conflict with the player, the implication is always there. She's not just a warrior, she's something else, something tied to a Daedric force that values the hunt above all else. And that perspective carries over into her views on the world itself. Ayla doesn't see hunting as a necessity, she sees it as a purpose. There's a difference there that's easy to overlook. Survival is one thing, but when the act itself becomes something you revere, something you align your identity around it starts to take a different meaning. It becomes a belief system. And like any belief system, it shapes how you see others, how you even see your spouse. In Ayla's case, that lens is built around predator and prey, strength and weakness, the natural order as defined by Herson. And while that might align with Skyrim's harsh environment on a surface level, it also strips away a lot of the nuance that defines other characters. There's less room for empathy, less room for restraint. Because in her world, the hunt is always justified. That becomes even more noticeable when you consider her as a spouse. Much like Janessa or Muri, Ayla can transition into a domestic role without any real change to her core identity. She does become supportive, present, even warm in certain interactions, but none of her underlying beliefs shift. She is still devoted to the Daedric prince, still fully committed to her werewolf nature, still aligned with a worldview that prioritizes instinct and dominance over anything else. Can you imagine your spouse turning into a werewolf and running out of the house, going off to kill someone, leaving you at home to deal with the children? And again, the game treats this as completely normal. There's no moment where that tension is addressed, no reflection on what it means to build a life with someone whose identity is so closely tied to something inherently violent and uncontrollable. It's simply accepted. But when you stop and think about it, that acceptance feels uneasy. Because Ayla isn't hiding anything at all. She's telling you exactly who she is, a follower of a Daedric prince, a hunter who embraces the act itself, a werewolf who has no desire to return to anything else. And she expects you to be fine with that. What makes her less disturbing than something like Muri or even Janassa is that her beliefs are at least consistent with the world she lives in. Skyrim is harsh and survival often requires strength and violence. Ayla takes that reality and leans into it completely. There's logic there, even if it's taken to an extreme. But that doesn't make it comfortable, because there's always the sense that her version of the world leaves very little room for anything beyond the hunt. And once you see that clearly, it's hard to ignore. For her unwavering devotion, her complete acceptance of her own transformation, and the quiet intensity of the beliefs that define her, Ayla the Huntress earns a 7 out of 10 on the disturbing scale. Skyrim gives you the illusion that marriage is simple. Pick a partner, settle down, build a life. It's clean, predictable, almost disconnected from the chaos happening everywhere else in the world. But when you actually look closer, that illusion starts to fall apart. Because characters like Muri, Janassa, and Ayla don't leave their pasts or their beliefs behind. They bring them with them, into your home, into your life, with your children. And the game never really stops to question what that means. Muri stands at the top for a reason. She isn't just shaped by betrayal, she chooses to become something colder because of it. Her willingness to have not just her betrayer killed, but an innocent person tied to him, shows a level of detachment that feels deeply personal. And the fact that she can move on from that so easily, stepping into a normal life without reflection, that's what makes her the most disturbing. Janessa then comes next. Not because she hides anything, but because she doesn't. Her complete openness about violence, the way she frames it, as if something is almost artistic, removes any sense of moral grounding. There are no limits with her, no hesitation, just a calm acceptance that anything can be solved with a blade. And then there's Ayla, the most understandable of the three, but still far from normal. Her devotion to the Daedric prince and her full embrace of being a werewolf places her in a world defined by instinct and the hunt. It makes sense within Skyrim, But that doesn't make it any less unsettling when you really think about it. And that's what ties all three of them together. They don't feel disturbing at first. It's only when you stop and really consider who they are, what they've done, what they believe, that it starts to sink in. Because Skyrim never forces you to question your choices, but sometimes you probably should. From the outside, Hurt and Hearn appear to be one of the most ordinary married couples in all of Skyrim, living together at Half Moon Mill on the road between Falkreath and Lake Ilinalta. They seem to embody a quiet, hard-working life, far removed from the chaos consuming the rest of the province. Travellers passing through see a functioning lumber mill, two seemingly polite owners and a peaceful home surrounded by dense forest. There are no city walls, no political disputes, no obvious signs of danger. Compared to many of Skyrim's more dramatic locations, Half Moon Mill feels almost comforting. It looks like the sort of place where exhausted adventurers could stop for directions before continuing their journey. But that first impression could hardly be more misleading. Beneath its calm exterior lies one of the most unsettling married couples in the game. Hurt and Hearn are vampires living among ordinary people, hiding their true identities behind the routine of daily work. Their home contains disturbing clues hinting at violent acts. Hearn eventually becomes the target of a Dark Brotherhood contract, and Hurt's unwavering loyalty reveals just how dangerous their relationship truly is. Together they present one of Skyrim's most convincing examples of evil hidden beneath normality. What makes Hurt and Hearn so disturbing isn't simply that they're vampires. Skyrim contains plenty of them. Movarth, the Volkir clan, numerous cave dwellers. Players expect those characters to be hostile. They usually live in ruins, crypts, or forgotten caverns. Hurt and Hearn choose something entirely different. They blend in, they work, they trade. They speak politely with passing travellers. Their greatest weapon isn't strength, it's normality. Half Moon Mill itself contributes enormously to this deception. Lumber mills represent productivity and honesty throughout Skyrim. Wood keeps homes warm, builds settlements, and supports local economies. A mill feels trustworthy. People naturally lower their guard. Travellers stop there because it appears safe. That makes the revelation considerably more disturbing. The building isn't a simple workplace, it's camouflage. The couple have effectively built an ordinary life around an extraordinary secret. That contrast is what lingers, not open horror, hidden horror. Players who investigate the property more carefully begin noticing signs that something isn't quite right. The deeper you look, the less ordinary the mill becomes. Inside the nearby shed are unsettling details that immediately change the atmosphere. Bloody rags, human remains, evidence suggesting violence occurred here. Bethesda never explicitly explains every detail. It doesn't need to. Environmental storytelling does the work. The game quietly allows players to connect the dots themselves. That realization arrives gradually. These aren't simply eccentric mill owners. Something far darker is happening behind closed doors. One of the most effective aspects of this storytelling is restraint. There is no lengthy confession, no dramatic cutscene, no villain explaining everything. Instead, the location asks players to notice, to observe, to question. That subtle approach often creates stronger horror than explicit answers. The imagination naturally fills the remaining gaps. Those gaps become unsettling precisely because they remain unresolved. The couple's vampiric nature also raises uncomfortable questions about their daily routine. Half Moon Mill sits beside a road used by merchants, hunters, pilgrims, and adventurers. People regularly pass through, some likely stop, some people spend time talking, perhaps even staying nearby. For ordinary business owners, those visitors represent customers. For vampires, however, they may represent something else entirely. The game never states outright how Hurt and Hearn sustain themselves, but the implications are difficult to ignore. Travellers disappear throughout Skyrim. Remote locations rarely attract investigation. Half Moon Mill occupies an ideal position for predators wishing to remain unnoticed. That possibility transforms every interaction with this odd couple. Their friendliness begins feeling calculated rather than genuine. Hearn becomes even more interesting once the Dark Brotherhood enters the story. During one of the Brotherhood's contracts, the player receives orders to assassinate him. On the surface, this seems like another routine target, yet it raises fascinating questions. Why Hearn? Who wanted him dead? Was it connected to his vampirism, a personal grudge, or simply another contract carried out for reasons never fully explained? The lack of answers actually strengthens the mystery. Not every assassination in Skyrim comes with complete context. Sometimes people simply end up on the Black Sacraments list. Hearn's inclusion quietly reinforces the sense that dangerous lives often end violently. What truly defines this couple, however, is Hurt's reaction. The moment Hearn is attacked, Hurt immediately intervenes. She doesn't hesitate, she doesn't flee, she fights. Knowing full well that the Dragonborn is attempting to kill her husband, she throws herself into the battle without question. Mechanically, this is standard NPC behaviour for allied characters. Narratively, however, it reveals remarkable loyalty. She understands the danger, she understands Hearn may already be doomed, yet she refuses to abandon him. In another story, that devotion might appear romantic. Here, it kind of becomes disturbing, because the relationship itself exists within a life built upon deception and predation. Their loyalty isn't directed towards protecting innocent people. It's directed towards protecting one another while concealing their true nature. Compared to many married couples in Skyrim, Hurt and Hearn actually function surprisingly well together. There are no arguments, no obvious resentment, no signs of domestic conflict. Ironically, their relationship appears healthier than several ordinary marriages throughout the province. That's part of what makes them unsettling. The problem isn't how they treat each other, it's what they may be doing together. Their partnership feels united, purposeful, almost inseparable. Whatever crimes they have committed or continue committing, they appear committed equally. That unity makes them significantly more dangerous than either would be alone. The isolation of Half Moon Mill amplifies this atmosphere considerably. Unlike vampires hiding within large castles or secret covens, Hurt and Hearn operate independently. No larger organisation supervises them. No guards monitor them. They answer to absolutely no one. The forest becomes their shield. Distance becomes protection. Players rarely visit unless they intentionally travel there. Isolation gives secrets room to survive, and Half Moon Mill demonstrates that perfectly. Over the years, players have developed numerous theories attempting to explain the couple further. One of the most persistent suggests that Hurt and Hearn survive by preying upon travellers using the road outside their home. While the game never explicitly confirms this, the bloody evidence surrounding the mill combined with their vampiric nature and isolated location makes the theory understandable. Everything needed for such a lifestyle already exists: privacy, victims, opportunity. The game deliberately leaves enough uncertainty for speculation to flourish. Another theory has attracted attention, with parts of the community proposing that Hurt and Hearn may be closely related and intentionally keeping their vampiric bloodline isolated. It is important to stress that this remains entirely speculative. Skyrim never confirms that the two are related, nor does it provide evidence establishing such a relationship as fact. However, the theory persists largely because Bethesda reveals almost nothing about their pasts. Who were they before becoming vampires? How long have they lived together? Where did they come from? Those unanswered questions invite players to construct explanations of their own. Ultimately, Hurt and Hearn earn their place among Skyrim's most disturbing married couples, not because they constantly threaten the player, but because they represent something far more unsettling. They look ordinary, they behave politely, they run a legitimate business. They appear to have built a peaceful life together. And beneath all of that lies blood, secrecy, death, and the possibility that their quiet existence depends upon victims who never realised the danger until it was too late. Hearn's assassination contract only reinforces that hidden darkness. Hurt's willingness to die defending him reveals a bond stronger than fear. Together they create one of Skyrim's most convincing examples of appearances being profoundly deceptive, a disturbing married couple who on the surface seem almost idyllic. Yet behind the walls of a lonely mill in the forests of Falkreath, they remind us that some of Skyrim's greatest horrors don't live in ancient ruins or forgotten crypts. Sometimes they simply live next door, smile politely, and wait for the next traveller to knock on the door. Marriage in Skyrim is often presented as one of the simplest decisions you can make. Find someone you like, wear an amulet of Mara, and settle down. But when you start looking more closely at the people behind those marriage options, things become far more complicated. Some spouses carry disturbing pasts that never truly leave them. Others have personalities that make living with them less appealing than first impressions suggest. And some hide secrets so dark that you begin to question whether they should ever have been marriage candidates in the first place. What's fascinating is that Skyrim never judges your decision. It doesn't stop you from marrying an assassin, a vampire, a mercenary, or someone with a deeply questionable moral compass. The choice is entirely yours, and that's what makes the system so interesting. Every spouse brings their own history into your home, whether you notice it or not. Because in a world filled with dragons, civil war, and Daedric princes, sometimes the most unsettling decision isn't choosing who to fight, it's choosing who to come home to.